I found the box of letters 3 weeks after my daughter stopped speaking to me. Not the letters she found. The ones I'd written but never sent. 47 letters spanning 11 years, each one addressed to Emily, each one explaining why I wasn't there. For her 8th birthday, her middle school graduation, her first heartbreak. Letters I wrote at 2 o'clock in the morning in motel rooms across 3 states, pouring out everything I couldn't say to her face because I was too afraid she wouldn't understand. And she didn't understand, not until she found the other box. The one I'd hidden in the attic. The one with 200 pages of medical records, court documents, and photographs that told a story I'd spent 15 years trying to protect her from. My name is Michael Torres. I'm 52 years old. And 4 weeks ago, my daughter screamed 6 words at me that I'll hear for the rest of my life. You were never a father to me. She was right. And she was wrong. And if you stick around, I'll tell you why both things can be true at the same time. But before we get into that, if you're finding value in this story, do me a favor and hit that like button. And if you want to hear more stories like this, stories about the complicated truth of family and forgiveness, subscribe to the channel. It helps more than you know. Now let me tell you about the worst and best month of my life. The fight happened on a Tuesday, March 14th, 2024. Emily had driven 3 hours from Portland to my place in Eugene, Oregon. She'd called ahead, which was unusual. Normally, she just showed up. Her voice on the phone had been tight, controlled. The voice she used when she was trying not to cry. She said we needed to talk. About her childhood, about me, about why I was never there. I'd known this conversation was coming for years. I just didn't know it would land like a freight train. She arrived at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I'd made coffee, set out the cookies she used to love as a kid. Mint chocolate chip. She didn't touch them. She sat down at my kitchen table, the same table where we used to do homework together on the weekends I had her, back when the custody arrangement was still fresh and we were both trying to figure out what our relationship was supposed to look like now that her mother and I were divorced. She folded her hands on the table, and I noticed she wasn't wearing the bracelet I'd given her for her 18th birthday, the silver one with her birthstone. She'd worn it every day for 7 years. Its absence felt like a warning. She said, I need you to be honest with me about something. And I said, okay, sweetheart, anything. And she said, why weren't you there? Not just sometimes. Why weren't you there for most of my childhood? And don't give me the excuse about work. Don't tell me about the long hours or the travel. I need the real reason. I felt my chest tighten. This was the moment. The moment I'd been dreading and preparing for since she was 7 years old. The moment when I'd have to decide whether to keep protecting her from the truth or finally let her see the whole ugly picture. I made the wrong choice. I said, Emily, it's complicated. There were things happening that you were too young to understand at the time. And her face changed. The control cracked. She said, I'm 25 years old, Dad. I'm not too young anymore. I just need to know why my father missed my 8th birthday, my confirmation, my high school graduation. Why you showed up late to my college orientation and left early. Why every important moment of my life, you were either absent or barely present. I tried to explain. I said I was doing the best I could with the situation I was in, and she stood up. Her chair scraped against the floor. She said, that's not an answer. That's an excuse. Do you know what it's like to watch other girls? With their fathers? To see them at dance recitals, at soccer games, at father-daughter events. Do you know how many times I made excuses for you? Her voice was rising now. She said, I told everyone you were busy. I told them you were important, that you had an important job that took you away. I defended you for years, and Mom never said a word against you. She never told me why you weren't there. She just said you loved me and you were doing your best. But I'm done accepting that. Then she said it. She said, "You were never a father to me. You were a stranger who showed up every few months with guilt gifts and empty promises. And I'm done. I'm done pretending that's enough." The words hit me like a physical blow. I stood up too. I said, "Emily, please, let me explain." And she said, "No, I don't want to hear it anymore. I came here hoping you'd finally be honest with me. But you're still hiding behind vague explanations and half-truths. I'm leaving." She walked toward the door. I followed her. I said, "Emily, wait, please." And she turned around, and there were tears streaming down her face. She said, "I loved you so much when I was little. Do you know that? I used to wait by the window for hours on the days you were supposed to pick me up. Sometimes you'd show up 3 hours late. Sometimes you wouldn't show up at all, and I'd make excuses. I'd tell myself you got stuck in traffic or had an emergency at work. But I was 7 years old, Dad. 7. And I learned that I couldn't count on you." She wiped her face with the back of her hand. She said, "I don't want a relationship built on excuses anymore. I can't do it. So until you're ready to be honest with me about why you abandoned me, don't call me. Don't text me. Don't reach out. I'm done." And she left. I stood in my doorway and watched her drive away, watched her car disappear down the street. And I went back inside and sat at that kitchen table for 3 hours, staring at those uneaten cookies, and cried like I hadn't. Cried since the day the judge handed down the custody ruling in 2009. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the conversation. Kept hearing her voice saying, "You were never a father to me." I got up at midnight and went to my office. I started pulling out files. Documents I'd kept in a locked cabinet for 15 years. Things I'd never wanted Emily to see. Things her mother and I had agreed to keep from her until she was old enough to understand. But when was old enough? 18? 25? 30? When do you tell your daughter that the reason you missed half her childhood wasn't because you didn't love her, but because you were fighting the hardest battle of your life just to stay alive and have any access to her at all? I spread the documents out on my desk. Medical records from 2008 to 2013. Court transcripts from the custody hearing. Police reports. Restraining order documentation. Psychiatric evaluations. Letters from my lawyer. Letters from her mother's lawyer. An entire paper trail of the 5 years that destroyed my relationship with my daughter and saved my life at the same time. And underneath all of that, in a worn cardboard box, were the letters. The 47 letters I'd written to Emily over the years. Letters I'd never sent because I didn't know how to explain to a child why her father was sleeping in his car some nights. Why he couldn't afford birthday presents some years. Why he looked so tired and thin and scared during their supervised visits. I opened the first letter. It was dated October 12, 2009, 2 weeks after the custody hearing. It started with, "Dear Emily, you turned 8 today. I'm sorry I couldn't be there for your party. Your mom sent me pictures, and you looked so happy. I wanted to be there so badly it hurt. But I need you to know something, even though you're too young to read this right now. I need you to know that I'm fighting for you. Every single day, I'm fighting to be your dad. It just doesn't look like fighting should look. It looks like lawyer meetings and court dates and psychiatric evaluations. It looks like me trying to prove that I'm stable enough, safe enough, healthy enough to be in your life. Because right now, the court doesn't think I am. And maybe they're right. I don't know anymore." I read through all 47 letters that night. Letters from motel rooms in Idaho where I'd been working construction jobs to pay child support and legal fees. Letters from my sister's couch in Boise where I'd lived for 8 months after I lost my apartment. Letters from the psychiatric facility where I'd spent 30 days in 2011, trying to get my mental health under control so I could petition for increased custody. Every letter was an explanation, an apology, A promise that I was trying, that I loved her, that my absence wasn't abandonment, it was survival. And none of them were enough. None of them would make a 7-year-old understand why her daddy wasn't there to tuck her in at night. The next morning, I called my ex-wife, Jennifer. We'd been divorced for 16 years, but we'd maintained a civil relationship for Emily's sake. She answered on the third ring. I said, "Emily came to see me yesterday." And Jennifer said, "I know." She called me after she left. She was pretty upset, Mike. I said, "She asked me why I wasn't there for her childhood." Long pause. Then Jennifer said quietly, "What did you tell her?" I said, "Not enough. Not the truth. I didn't know how." Jennifer sighed. She said, "She deserves to know, Mike. She's 25. She's old enough to understand now." I said, "Understand what?" That her father had a complete mental breakdown when she was 7. That I spent 2 years in and out of psychiatric care. That I was so depressed I could barely function. That the court deemed me an unfit parent for 5 years. How do I tell her that without making her feel like it was her fault? Jennifer's voice was gentle. She said, "It was never her fault. And she needs to hear that from you. She spent her whole life thinking you didn't care enough to show up." That's worse than the truth, Mike. The truth is that you were sick. The truth is that you fought like hell to get better so you could be in her life. The truth is complicated and messy, but it's not abandonment. I said, "She told me not to contact her." Jennifer said, "I know. Give her time. But Mike, you need to tell her everything." She found some old photos at my house last week, pictures from when she was little. And she asked me why you looked so thin in some of them, why you looked so tired. She's starting to piece things together. She knows there's more to the story. She just doesn't know what it is. We talked for another 20 minutes. Jennifer told me that Emily had been in therapy for the past year, working through childhood trauma related to my absence. Her therapist had encouraged her to confront me, to ask for the truth. That's why she'd driven down. She was ready for answers. And I'd failed her again by not giving them. After I hung up, I went to the attic. I'd been avoiding that space for years. It was where I'd stored everything from the worst period of my life. Boxes of court documents, medical bills, journals I'd kept during my time in treatment. Things I'd shoved up there and tried to forget. I found the box I was looking for. A banker's box labeled 2008 to 2013 in my handwriting. I brought it down to the kitchen table and opened it. Inside were the things I'd never wanted Emily to see. But Jennifer was right. She deserved the truth. The truth started in 2007. Emily was 6. Jennifer and I had been divorced for a year, sharing custody 50-50. I was working as a project manager for a construction company, making decent money, living in a nice apartment near Emily's school so I could drop her off on my weeks. Life was stable. Not happy, exactly. The divorce had been hard on both of us, but stable. Then in December 2007, I started having panic attacks. They came out of nowhere. I'd be driving to work and suddenly I couldn't breathe. My heart would race. I'd have to pull over and wait for it to pass. At first, I thought it was stress. Work had been demanding. The holidays were always hard as a divorced parent. But the attacks got worse, more frequent, more intense. By February 2008, I was having them multiple times a day. I went to a doctor. He prescribed anti-anxiety medication and suggested therapy. I did both. The medication helped initially, but then I started having other symptoms. Insomnia, loss of appetite. I lost 20 pounds in 6 weeks. I'd wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning with my mind racing, convinced something terrible was going to happen. The therapist diagnosed me with generalized anxiety disorder and depression. She increased my medication. It didn't help. By April 2008, I was barely functioning. I'd call in sick to work, spend entire days in bed. On the weeks I had Emily, I'd force myself to get up, make her breakfast, take her to school. But I was running on empty. And Emily noticed. She was only 6, but she noticed. She'd ask me why I was so tired, why I didn't want to play anymore, why I looked sad all the time. In June 2008, I had a complete breakdown. I was supposed to pick Emily up from Jennifer's house for my week of custody. I got in my car and started driving. But halfway there, I had a panic attack so severe I had to pull over. I sat in my car on the side of the road, hyperventilating, convinced I was dying. Someone called 911. An ambulance came. They took me to the emergency room. The ER doctor said I was having a severe anxiety attack, but they wanted to keep me overnight for observation because my heart rate was dangerously elevated. They called Jennifer. She came to the hospital. I told her I couldn't take Emily that week. I couldn't take care of her when I couldn't even take care of myself. Jennifer was understanding. She said she'd keep Emily for the week, that I should focus on getting better. But I could see the worry in her eyes, the concern that this wasn't just a bad week, that this was something bigger. She was right. After the hospital, things got worse. I started missing work. I couldn't focus, couldn't complete basic tasks. I'd sit at my desk and stare at my computer screen for hours, unable to make my brain work. In July, I lost my job. They called it a layoff, but I knew the truth. I'd become unreliable. They couldn't count on me anymore. Losing my job sent me into a spiral. Without income, I couldn't afford my apartment. I moved in with my sister in Boise temporarily, just until I could get back on my feet. But getting back on my feet seemed impossible when I could barely get out of bed. Jennifer filed for a custody modification in August. She wasn't trying to be cruel. She was trying to protect Emily. She argued that I was in no condition to care for a child, that my mental health issues made me an unfit parent until I could demonstrate stability. Her lawyer presented evidence, medical records, testimony from Emily's teacher, who'd noticed changes in her behavior during my custody weeks. She'd become withdrawn, anxious. The court agreed. They reduced my custody to supervised visitation only, 2 hours per week, until I could provide proof of mental health treatment and stability. The judge said it wasn't permanent. It was just until I got better. But at the time, sitting in that courtroom, hearing that I couldn't be alone with my own daughter, it felt like the end of the world. That's when I wrote the first letter. October 12, 2009, Emily's 8th birthday. I was living in a motel room in Boise, working a minimum wage job at a hardware store, trying to save enough money for a deposit on an apartment. I just finished my 2nd month of intensive outpatient therapy. I was on different medication, stronger medication that made me feel like I was walking through fog. But I was trying. I was trying so hard. And missed my daughter's birthday because I couldn't afford the gas money to drive to Eugene, and I didn't want her to see me living in a motel room. The next 3 years were a blur of psychiatric appointments, therapy sessions, and court dates. I was diagnosed with major depressive disorder and PTSD from childhood trauma that had been triggered by the divorce and custody loss. I spent 30 days in an inpatient psychiatric facility in 2011, after a particularly bad episode where I told my therapist I didn't want to be alive anymore. I wasn't suicidal. I was just tired. Tired of fighting. Tired of being broken. Tired of missing my daughter's life. The facility helped. I started trauma therapy, learned coping mechanisms, got on medication that actually worked. By 2012, I was stable enough to petition the court for increased custody. The judge reviewed my medical records, spoke to my therapist, and agreed to increase my time with Emily to unsupervised weekend visits twice a month. It wasn't 50-50, but it was something. I could have her in my home again. I could be her dad again, even if only in small pieces. But by then, Emily was 11. The damage was done. She'd spent 3 years seeing me for 2-hour supervised visits, where we'd sit in a room at a family center with a social worker watching us. 3 years of me showing up exhausted, medicated, trying to pretend everything was fine. 3 years of missed birthdays, missed school events, missed moments. And even when I got increased custody, I was still struggling. Still working low-wage jobs to pay off medical debt and legal fees. Still living in a small apartment. Still trying to rebuild a life that had completely fallen apart. I never told Emily any of this. How do you explain mental illness to a child? How do you tell your 11-year-old that you weren't there because you were too depressed to function? That the court didn't trust you to be alone with her because you were mentally unstable? Jennifer and I agreed that we wouldn't tell her unless absolutely necessary. We told her that Daddy was sick and needed to get better. We told her that the custody arrangement was just temporary. We told her I loved her and I was trying my best. All of which was true. But it wasn't the whole truth. The whole truth was that I was drowning, and saving myself meant spending less time with her. The whole truth was that being a good father meant admitting I couldn't be one until I got help. And no child can understand that. By the time Emily was in high school, I'd stabilized. I had a decent job again, a nice apartment, regular therapy that kept me balanced. My custody had been increased to 30% every other weekend plus holidays. It still wasn't 50-50, but it was better. I showed up to more events. I was present for more moments. But I was always aware of what I'd missed. The first 11 years of her life. The years that mattered most. And I could see it in Emily's eyes. The distance. The wariness. She loved me. But she didn't trust me. Not really. Not the way a daughter should trust her father. I packed everything into a box. All the court documents. All the medical records. All the psychiatric evaluations. All the letters. I wrote a note and put it on top. The note said, "Emily, this is everything I should have told you a long time ago. This is why I wasn't there. Not because I didn't love you. Not because I didn't want to be your father. But because I was fighting to stay alive and to be well enough to be the father you deserved. I'm sorry, I didn't tell you sooner. I was trying to protect you. But in doing that, I hurt you worse. I let you think I abandoned you. And that's on me. Read everything in this box. Take your time. And when you're ready, if you're ready, call me. I love you. I've loved you every single day of your life, even the days I couldn't show it. Love, Dad." I drove to Portland the next day. I didn't call ahead. I drove to Emily's apartment, the one she shared with her boyfriend near downtown. I left the box on her doorstep, knocked, and walked back to my car. I waited until I saw her open the door, see the box, look around for me. Our eyes met across the parking lot. I nodded, got in my car, and drove home. 3 weeks went by. 3 weeks of silence. I didn't call, didn't text. I'd promised her space, and I was going to give it to her. But every day, I wondered if she'd open the box, if she'd read the documents, if she understood now why things had been the way they were, or if it was too late. If the damage was too deep to repair. I went to work, came home, went to therapy. My therapist asked how I was holding up. I said I didn't know. She said that was honest. She reminded me that I couldn't control Emily's reaction. All I could do was tell the truth and hope she was ready to hear it. On the 22nd day, my phone rang at 8 o'clock in the evening. Emily's name on the screen. My heart started pounding. I almost didn't answer, too afraid of what she'd say. But I did. I said, "Hello?" and there was breathing on the other end. Then crying. Quiet crying. Then Emily's voice, broken and small, said, "Dad?" I said, "I'm here, sweetheart." She said, "I read everything. I read all of it." I waited. She said, "Why didn't you tell me?" Her voice cracked. She said, "Why didn't you tell me you were that sick? That you were in the hospital? That you almost died?" I felt tears start. I said, "Because I didn't want you to carry that. I didn't want you to feel responsible." She was crying harder now. She said, "I thought you didn't love me. I thought you just didn't care enough to show up. And this whole time, you were fighting just to survive?" Dad, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for what I said to you. I was crying too now. I said, "You don't have anything to apologize for. You didn't know. That's my fault, not yours." She said, "I read your letters. All 47 of them. You wrote me letters for 11 years and never sent them?" I said, "I didn't know how. I didn't know how to explain everything in a way that wouldn't hurt you. I didn't know how to hurt you." She said, "They hurt worse not knowing. I spent my whole childhood thinking I wasn't enough. That if I was good enough, smart enough, if I tried hard enough, you'd want to be there. And the whole time, it wasn't about me at all. You were sick, Dad. You were sick, and you were trying to get better. Why didn't you just tell me that?" I said, "Because you were 7, 8, 9. How do I tell a child that her father is too depressed to get out of bed? That he's in psychiatric treatment? That the court doesn't trust him to be alone with her? I was trying to protect you from the ugliness of it all." She said, "But I needed to know. I needed to know that it wasn't my fault." Her voice broke completely. She said, "I needed to know that you loved me." I said, "I always loved you. Every single day. Even the days I couldn't show it. Even the days I was barely holding on. You were the reason I kept fighting. You were the reason I went to therapy, took medication, did the work. Because I wanted to be your dad. I wanted to be well enough to be in your life." There was a long silence. Then Emily said, "Can I come see you?" I said, Yes, anytime." She said, "I'm coming now. I'm getting in my car right now." I said, "Emily, it's 8 o'clock at night. It's a 3-hour drive." She said, "I don't care. I need to see you. I need to talk to you in person." She paused. Then she said, "I need to hug my dad." I started crying harder. I said, "Okay, drive safe. Text me when you're on the road." She said, "I will." "I love you, Dad." I said, "I love you too, sweetheart." She arrived at 11 o'clock that night. I'd stayed up, made coffee, waited by the window like I used to wait for her when she was little. I saw her headlights pull into the driveway. She got out of the car, and I opened the door. We stood there looking at each other for a moment. Then she ran to me, threw her arms around me, and we both cried. We stood in my doorway, holding each other, and cried like we should have cried years ago. We talked until 3 o'clock in the morning. She asked questions. I answered them. All of them. All of them. The ones I've been avoiding for 15 years. I told her about the panic attacks, the hospitalization, the inpatient facility, the court hearings, the supervised visits. I showed her the medical records, walked her through the timeline. I explained why I looked so thin in those photos, why I seemed so tired, why I missed her 8th birthday, her confirmation, her graduation. Not because I didn't care, but because I was barely surviving. She cried. I cried. But something was different this time. The tears weren't just grief. They were relief. The truth was finally out. The wall between us was finally down. She said, "I wish you'd told me sooner." I said, "So do I, but I was afraid you'd see me differently. That you'd see me as weak or broken. She looked at me with tears in her eyes and said, "You're the strongest person I know. You fought through all of that and never gave up on being my dad. That's not weakness. That's love." We made a plan that night. Real conversations. Real honesty. Family therapy together. We agreed that we couldn't get back the years we'd lost, but we could build something new. Something honest. Something real. She stayed that night, slept in the guest room. In the morning, we made breakfast together. Pancakes. She said, "Remember when we used to make pancakes every Saturday morning during your weekends?" I said, "I remember. You always wanted chocolate chips in yours." She smiled. It was the first real smile I'd seen from her in years. She said, "You always put extra chocolate chips in when Mom wasn't looking." I said, "Don't tell her. It's been our secret for 15 years. She laughed. Actually laughed. And I realized how much I'd missed that sound. Over the next few weeks, Emily and I talked every day. Phone calls, texts, video chats. She asked more questions. I gave more answers. She told me about her childhood from her perspective, the moments she remembered, the pain she'd carried. I listened. Really listened. I apologized for the things I could have done differently, even if I'd been doing my best at the time. And slowly, carefully, we started to rebuild. 2 months after that terrible fight in my kitchen, Emily drove down for Sunday dinner. We cooked together, ate together, cleaned up together. Normal things that felt miraculous. As we were washing dishes, she said, "I've been telling people about you." I said, "Oh yeah? What are you saying?" She said, "The truth. That my dad struggled with mental illness when I was little. That he fought his way back. That he's been in recovery for over a decade. That he's the reason I'm not afraid to talk about my own anxiety now. Because I watched him get help and get better." I felt tears prick my eyes. I said, "You have anxiety?" She nodded. She said, "Started in college. I didn't want to tell you because I thought you'd feel guilty, like it was genetic or something." I said, "Are you getting help?" She said, "Yeah, I've been in therapy for a year. On medication for 6 months. It's helping." She looked at me. She said, "I learn from the best." I pulled her into a hug. I said, "I'm proud of you for getting help. That takes courage." She said, "I learned that from you too." Before I let you go, if this story resonated with you, if it reminded you that the truth is complicated and family is worth fighting for, hit that subscribe button. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Stories like this, stories about real struggle and real redemption, they matter. And your support helps me keep telling them. Thank you for listening. Now let me finish this. Last week, Emily asked if she could bring her boyfriend to meet me. Really meet me. She said, "I told him everything. About your illness, about the custody situation, about the letters. And he said he wants to meet the man who fought that hard to be in his daughter's life. So they're coming for dinner next Saturday. And I'm nervous, excited, grateful, but mostly I'm just thankful that my daughter knows the truth now. That she understands I was never absent by choice. That every day I wasn't there, I was fighting to get back to her. The letters are still in that box. All 47 of them. Emily asked if she could keep them. She said, "They're proof that you never stopped being my father. Even when you couldn't be there physically, you were still thinking about me. Still loving me. Still trying." She was right. And she was wrong that day in my kitchen when she said I was never a father to her. But I understand why she said it. Because I didn't give her the information she needed to see the whole picture. I let her live with half-truths and missing pieces. And that's on me, Dot. But here's what I learned through all of this. Love isn't just showing up. Sometimes love is fighting your own demons so you can be well enough to show up. Sometimes love is protecting your child from ugly truths until they're old enough to understand them. Sometimes love is imperfect and messy and looks nothing like it should. Sometimes love is 47 unsent letters written at 2 o'clock in the morning because you can't sleep, knowing your daughter is growing up without you and there's nothing you can do about it except get better. Sometimes love is losing custody of your child and using that loss as motivation to get the help you desperately need. Sometimes love is supervised visits where you put on a brave face for 2 hours even though you're barely holding yourself together. Sometimes love is admitting you're not okay and doing the hard, painful work to become okay. And sometimes love is finally telling the truth, even when it's 15 years too late and you're terrified of what your daughter will think of you. Emily forgave me, not for being absent. She forgave me for not trusting her with the truth sooner. She said, "I can handle hard things, Dad. I'm your daughter. I inherited your strength, even if I didn't understand where it came from." She's right about that too. The grave I mentioned earlier, that's metaphorical. I didn't die during those years. But the man I was before 2008 did die. The man who had it all together, who thought mental illness was something that happened to other people, who believed strength meant never asking for help. That man died in a hospital emergency room in June 2008, and what came after was harder and messier, and more painful than anything I'd experienced before. But it was also real. It was honest. And it taught me that being a good father doesn't mean being perfect. It means showing up when you can, fighting to get better when you can't, and eventually trusting your child with the truth, even when the truth is complicated and painful. I'm not the father I wanted to be for Emily. I missed too much. I wasn't there for too many moments. But I'm a father I fought like hell to become. And now, finally, she knows that. She knows that every missed birthday was a day I spent trying to get well enough to be there for the next one. Every missed event was a reminder of what I was fighting for. Every letter I wrote and never sent was proof that she was always on my mind, always in my heart, even when I couldn't be in her life the way I wanted to be. That has to be enough. That has to count for something. And the fact that Emily is willing to rebuild our relationship now, to start fresh with honesty and truth, tells me that maybe it does count. Maybe love isn't measured by perfect attendance. Maybe it's measured by the willingness to keep trying, to keep fighting, to keep showing up in whatever way you can. Even if that way is imperfect and incomplete and 15 years too late. My daughter and I lost a lot of years. But we have years ahead of us now. Years to make new memories. Years to be honest with each other. Years to build the relationship we should have had all along. And that's more than I thought I'd have 4 weeks ago when she walked out my door and told me not to contact her. So if you're struggling with mental illness, if you're fighting to be present in your child's life, if you're carrying guilt about the times you weren't there, hear me when I say this. Get help. Do the work. Fight the fight. And when you're ready, tell the truth. Your children deserve to know that your absence wasn't abandonment. It was survival. And survival is love too.